everything rises and falls on leadership. And so it became my passion. And so my goal with my business and my stuff is to create a world where great leadership is the norm and not the anomaly. We've all experienced either ourselves or seen other people who've experienced bad bosses. And it can create so much stress, it can cause health issues, so many things, just those experiences. And it doesn't just affect them, but they take it home too. I mean, you take it home and it affects their home life and it affects their marriages. And it says, well, people should just get over it. People should. No, you are affecting people by your actions. And so it's almost like as a leader, you have a duty to be the best you can be, because you affect, first of all, the success of whatever you're doing. But secondly, you affect people. And that's important, I think, like really important.
What's the most important thing in any team? In business, we've talked about it being customers, people, and many, many gurus will argue all sorts of things like it's all about revenue or intellectual property or content even, and so on. But in a team more specifically, so a group of people working towards a common goal, my view has always been that it's leadership and it's people. Leadership has the potential to make all of these things better anyway, and the people really are the key to successful leadership and teamwork. And I've said it before, I've said this before as well, the reason I'm here, why I'm doing this podcast, why I'm so passionate about this subject is because I want to see a world where everyone can tell a story, a true story of an amazing leader they've worked for. Even today, if I ask a room of people 2 questions, didn't mean to swear at the video viewers there, 2 questions, who here has worked for a bad manager and who here has worked for a great one, I can pretty much guarantee twice as many people will put their hand up for question 1 than question 2. Wouldn't it be awesome if that were the other way around? And my guest today is on the exact same page. His name is Thomas Harris. He's a leadership trainer and author. And in his words, he wants to create a world where great leadership is the norm and not the anomaly. Today, we'll be exploring what that might look like, hearing his story so far, and his key leadership tips. So you may not be surprised to hear there's plenty we'll be agreeing on. But either way, I hope you enjoy it, and I'm sure it's going to be useful.
Welcome to the Leading with Integrity podcast. Leadership talk for the modern manager. With your host, David Hatch.
Thomas, welcome to Leading with Integrity. It's great to have you on the show, particularly as only a few months or a few weeks even into your podcast guesting experience. So it's lovely to have a relative newcomer on the show as well.
Well, I appreciate it. I am glad to be here and I'm excited. And just from our conversation before, I'm just ready to talk about leadership because it's a great topic. So.
Absolutely. Well, we're certainly passionate about it, aren't we? That's why we're here. So really, to kick everything off and get us started with the episode, it's over to you to tell the listeners a bit about yourself, your career so far, background if you like, up to you how much you want to tell us, what you do today and why you do it.
I think my first foray in leadership was when I was a kid. And my brother and I would go visit our cousins and stay there and hang out. And occasionally the leaders would leave, or the adults would leave, and they would put one of us kids in charge. And I always wanted to be the one in charge because I could tell everybody what to do. I'd be the boss. And I was like, man, I want to be that person. But I wasn't the oldest. But one day they left and they put me in charge. And I was so excited. It's just like, lights from heaven shining on me and everything. I was so excited about being in charge. But then I told one of the kids to do or not to do something. And they didn't do it. And I was like, wait a minute. I'm the one in charge. Why aren't they doing what I say? And I would love to say I learned my lesson at that point. But I didn't quite learn my lesson. Because looking back, I've had different leadership positions, kind of formal, informal, different things. And been under many different leaders. But I even remember I guess it was a little over 10 years ago or something. I was at a job and I was like, man, if I only had a position, then I could really lead. And I didn't realize how wrong I was. And so I've like throughout my career, I've done different things. I've done like started like a video business one year. I worked at a technical college. I've taught K through 12, taught third and fifth grade a couple of years ago. I've done AV installation, worked at group homes. I've been a foster parent and all these different things. I've, experienced some really great, some good bosses, some not so good bosses. But I realized as I went along, and I started the business with a friend of mine from one of the schools I worked at, and we started a textbook business originally, but we also started like a website with it for soft skills and soft skills training. And so my business partner left, and so the textbook part was gone because that was kind of his expertise. So I just focused on the skill stuff. And as I started focusing on the skill stuff, I was putting a lot of time management, conflict resolution, and such like that. And I got to a point where I need to do leadership because leadership's like a big topic. It's popular, And so I started looking at it and I started researching it. And first I realized just like really most people out there, I thought I knew leadership, but I really didn't. And I don't mean that as an insult to people, but it's just that we often, just as humans, assume we know and that we're good at things. We pick up what we see around us and we think we know it. And sometimes we don't know as well as we think we know. And this, like I said, not an insult to anybody. But I realized, at least for me, I did not know as well as I did. Because, like I said, I thought I had to have a position. But I also realized a lot of the stuff out there was just not accurate. And I started looking at it. And so I really started deep diving into leadership. And it became really important to me because at first it was just a topic to write about for my blog. But then it was like, holy cow, this is like the most important aspect of anything, of leadership, of everything. And without it, everything rises and falls on leadership. And so it became my passion. And so my goal with my business and my stuff is to create a world where great leadership is the norm and not the anomaly. And that's kind of what I want. And so I wrote my book. It became a passion project. At first I was like, well, I just need a book. I need to write something that way, get leverages some authority or whatever, because you have a book. But I wrote it, my first draft, and I sent it to a friend to edit, and she wasn't able to edit for like 4 months because she had a lot going on, and which turned out really good, because when I got it back and I read my writing, I was like, whoa, this isn't very good. And so I rewrote my whole book, or a lot of it. Like I've added a lot more stuff, which is a good thing. So I really put my heart and soul in the book, because then it's just, hey, these are just the basics of leadership. Here's, what leadership is and stuff. And so that, I guess that's kind of what I'm building off of now, is just trying to use that to help teach, to online teaching courses and stuff, whatever I can, just to kind of help push the truth of leadership along.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of familiar truths in that story, I think, certainly for myself, I'm sure for pretty much all the listeners as well. I found as well, at least it's one of those things, isn't it? Like, before you get to do it, you think you understand it. And
right.
So you don't necessarily dive too deep into understanding it better, because you think, well, I already know what it is. And then as soon as you get that first leadership role, like, it's just lesson after lesson after lesson, usually like slapping you across the face with some harsh reality you didn't realize until too late. And it's one of those funny things, isn't it? But I so agree with you. It's, especially in the business environment and the modern context of that and everything that we've been through the last sort of 5 years even, it does make a difference to every little part of that business. And yes, I'm biased. Of course I'm going to say that, because that's why I'm here as well. But at the same time, people talk about the shareholders a lot as being one of the most important things. People talk about like the process or the sales or the revenue figure. All of those things are important, of course they are, but what's the one common element that can have an impact on every single one of those important things? It is leadership, isn't it? And people, which are two very closely connected things, at least in my opinion.
Oh yeah, like it's the number one determining factor. Like example after example has just shown, you can have the same team and different leader and get completely different results. Like, Jocko Willink, Leaf Babe, in their book Extreme Ownership, they talk about Navy SEAL training. and they had the boats. I don't know a lot about it, but they had a lot of the boats and they had different drills. And they said, they switched the leader of the team that kept getting first and the team that kept getting last. And then the team that was getting last started getting first. It was the leader the whole time. And then you have the Toyota factory. When they started their first factory, they took over GM, the whole GM factory. That was terrible. And they were required to keep 80% of their employees. And just because of change of leadership and the way they did things, it became from like the worst producing to like the best one. And so it's just there's like so many stories. You have Michael Abrashoff and David Marquet, who were captains of the Navy, and they had like the worst ships when they got them, but they changed differently leadership. And I mean, they still have to have the same people. Yes, you have the same number of people coming in and going like normal, but it wasn't the people that made the difference. It was the leadership. And like John Maxwell says, that leadership is the law of the lid. And I always forget the adjectives he uses. Like it's like the 21 irrefutable, irresistible, whatever laws of leadership in his book. He talks about the law of the lid, where your organization or team cannot rise above your level of leadership. And even with that, if you are like, say, he called like a level 3 leader, and people on your team are level 5, they're going to leave because they can't serve under that level of leadership. And so like, leadership is so important because it determines the success and failure of everything. And if your team's not performing to where you want it to go, it's not your team. It's ultimately on you. But even more than that, so it's important because it's a determining factor of success for a business. But even more than that, it affects people. Like people spend so many hours at work, and the leadership, we've all experienced either ourselves or seen other people who've experienced bad bosses. And it can create so much stress, it can cause health issues, so many things, just those experiences. And it doesn't just affect them, but they take it home too. I mean, you take it home and it affects their home life and it affects their marriages. And it says, well, people should just get over it. People should, no, you are affecting people by your actions. And so it's almost like as a leader, you have a duty to be the best you can be, because you affect, first of all, the success of whatever you're doing. But secondly, you affect people. And that's important, I think, like really important.
100%. Yeah. I think, yeah. I mean, I don't want to play the blame game or anything, but it does feel like that whole, people should just get over it. That's just the excuse of the lazy, bad manager, isn't it? Because it misses that fundamental part of being human, doesn't it? Which is that, you can't, unless you're a sociopath or something, you can't like separate and compartmentalize all those different parts of your life, and the feelings will bleed over. And if you don't understand that and you're trying to lead people, and I mean, we've all worked for a manager like that. I mean, I can think of a few examples in my own career where they were almost like puzzled that somebody was upset at work because of something that had happened at home, and they were just like, it didn't compute for them. Maybe and it's weird stuff like that. And I don't know if lazy is the fair assumption. It's probably not, but there's a misunderstanding there, I think, that too many people have.
For sure. Yeah.
Which maybe leads us into the next question, actually, or the first question, really, talking about this difference between leadership and management. Because I think this is one of the fundamental issues, isn't it? When you first take that step into management, is understanding what the differences are between these two very important words, because they are kind of used interchangeably far too often.
Right.
So what is the difference in your opinion, and what does leadership really mean?
How we define something is how we act on it. Like if I define parenting as making my kids behave, then that's going to affect how I parent my kids, like a lot, because I'll be focusing on immediate results versus long term. And so it's important that we define things well. And leadership, I'm going to talk about what it's not and how it's defined so we can get to where it is. So like often people think of leadership as a position. Well, that's a leadership, and they think of the CEO or executive, or just moving up. Like I thought I needed a position to be a leader, and there are leadership positions, but those just mean they're positions where someone's supposed to lead. It doesn't mean they know how or that they can, and so it's not really the position, because you can lead without a position, and it happens all the time. Like if you go into a meeting and you may have the boss or someone who's in charge, but if everybody's always looking at somebody else and following the other person's lead, even if they're not the one in charge, that person's the leader because they're the one everybody looks at. And so you don't have to have a position. So it's not a position. Sometimes people define leadership as that by function. So for example, well, leadership like you'll hear the phrase, to me, leadership is. What's that? Anytime you hear the word to me, that's dangerous. But to me, leadership is decision making, or it's problem solving, it's building relationships. And those are good things, and those are things you need to do, but it's like defining carpentry as cutting wood or nailing in a nail, or it's like defining surgery as cutting people open. Like if my surgeon defines surgery as cutting me open, I wouldn't want to use them because I want to be closed up too. So, like if you focus, for example, on decision making, if that's your definition, then you're probably going to try to make all the decisions because that's what you think you're supposed to do, because that's to you what leadership is. So if you define it that way, then it's going to hurt you and it's going to hurt your organization because you have the definition wrong. So it's important we don't focus on, and it's also not whatever we want. Sometimes today's like leadership's just like whatever feels good to you. And that feels nice, but what matters is it effective, and it's not because leadership has a definition. And the best definition I've seen it in a couple places, but I can't remember the name of the guy, but he said it was like the Leadership Theory and Practice book. And like the first chapter was great. I didn't really care about the theories. I think sometimes we can focus so much on theories instead of application, but it was neat to learn about. But in the first chapter, his definition, and I'm paraphrasing it, is basically leadership is the process of guiding people to the accomplishment of a goal through influence. And that's kind of like the basic definition. And everything else kind of fits into that, the building relationships, building decision-making, problem solving, because the whole thing, it's a process. Things change. The principles just stay the same, but the things change the way you relate with people, like the day-to-day stuff, how your relationship with people, you're guiding people somewhere, because if you're not taking people anywhere, then you're not really leading. You're just being a good friend or whatever it may be. You're guiding, which means you're not forcing. It's not a position or authority that's making it. And it's through influence. And again, not position. You are building relationships with people. I define influence as the relationship and respect you have with other people that causes them to act with and for you. And so when you build that influence with people, then they act for you and they act with you because of that influence, because of that respect. If you don't have it, then you can't really lead, because if you are forcing people, that's not really leading. And so to me, that's like, as I said the word to me, and I said I don't like it. The definition of leadership is, broadly, is that what that is, and everything's kind of built off of that. And so when it comes to leadership and management, leadership, I looked a lot for that the difference in books, like John Maxwell books. Nothing against John Maxwell and that, but I've read different things, and nobody really gave me a clear answer. And I was trying to seek it because there's so many different definitions. And then you have like the leadership memes, and those are terrible. The leadership versus management memes. And they always show leaders as angels and managers as these horrible, evil people. And it's always binary. It's like great and terrible. It's like the managers work for Lord Voldemort or whatever, and everybody else is good. But I think it was Julie Zhao in her book, The Making of a Manager. And again, this is kind of a paraphrase of what she said, but she had a great definition, I thought. And she said, leadership is a skill and management is a position. You don't have to have a position to lead, but you can't be a good manager without also being a good leader. And I always thought that really fit so well, because that's what management is, a position. Like, yes, there's things you learn to be a manager to be well, but you don't just learn a skill and, I'm a manager now. No, you have to be put into a management position. But a leader is just a skill. And being a skill, it means a couple of things. First of all, it's something anybody can learn. It's not something you're born with or whatever. It's just set behaviors or things you practice that you can become a good leader. It's not, you're not made a leader like a manager. It's just something you learn and practice, like through influence and so on. Again, you don't have that position, but to be a good manager, sometimes people only put leaders as the people on top, managers as everyone else. But even managers have to be able to lead. because you're still leading people. You still have people around you. You're still taking people somewhere, like toward a goal or whatever it may be. You have to be able to build that influence and lead people. Otherwise, you're not going to be effective.
I like all of those definitions. You're hitting on one of the big problems of our field, actually, which is that there are so many different ideas of what leadership means. Like, there's no one single definition, is there? I mean, you've given, half a dozen just in that one answer. And they're all good for different reasons. I mean, when you talk about the word influence, I think that comes up quite a lot in quite a lot of definitions, even if it's not explicitly stated, that's what they're talking about. So you go back to some from, like 1950s and what General Eisenhower had to say about it, what he was talking about really when he said it's the skill of getting people to do what you want them to do because they thought it was their idea, not yours. That's influence, isn't it, by any other name? And I like the last one as well, and it makes me think of that really simple one that again comes through in all the memes, which is about it's the focus of what you're doing. So leadership is about people, whereas management is about things and processes, stuff, which is very simplistic, probably too simple, but it's right. I think if we could take that a step further, like management is also a skill, I think. And again, like it's possible to manage things if you look at it as like an administrative skill set, a method of control, a method of getting certain things done in a process in a certain way. Like you don't necessarily need the title to be good at that or to learn how to do it. Whereas leadership, it's all about putting the people first, isn't it? It's about, and it can be a little bit sort of mercenary maybe in terms of why you're doing it even. Not sure I agree with that, but it can be. If what you're trying to achieve, what maybe the manager wants to do, is just you're doing it in a different way. So instead of focusing on like deadlines and KPIs and, whatever other management speak you want to throw in there, you're focused on, okay, what does this person need in order to do this piece of work that needs to be done? And then once you're starting down that path, then you're starting to build a relationship and you're starting to focus on influence and support and empathy and emotional intelligence, etc., things that a manager alone will never think of, which is why, long story short, I massively agree with you can't do one without the other. Unless, maybe if you're a manager who doesn't manage people, you manage a machine, maybe. Or social media, you're a marketing manager or something like that, and you don't actually manage any people, then maybe. But yeah, that's an edge case, though, isn't it? But I really love that, and I say that all the time as well. I'm blue in the face sometimes. But anyway, we've hit on this already a little bit about the misconceptions about leadership, and there's a lot of them. And we, again, not to rehash the last answer, but if you look back at sort of the more traditional approaches to leadership, and I know you're a practice, not theory person, but autocratic leadership is a big field, or even today you still see it quite a lot, and that itself has quite a lot of myths around it, and there's probably one of my favorites is in there. So what I'd really like to hear actually is, what's your favorite myth about leadership, and why is it a myth?
This one kind of applies, like it kind of goes together. So the myth of leadership styles, I think, or the big focus on it, to me, I guess it hit me the hardest. But I think that really sums up into what I think is the biggest myth, and that is that leadership is about you. And because leadership, again, is guiding people to somewhere. And so much of today focuses on, well, how do you like to lead? Do you like to lead from the front, the side, behind? Do you like to, you must discover your style so you can be the best you can be. But the thing is, it's not about you. And it's about getting your team to the mission. And there's High Performance Habits by Brendan Burchard. In the book, he talks about a client he had that gave him an ultimatum, and he called the client Tim. And he was coaching Tim, I think it was earlier in his career, or it was early in Brendan's career. And he was trying to help the guy who was a leader to improve his leadership and improve the results he gets. And they did all the strength tests, they did the personality tests, they did all of those things, and the guy wasn't improving. And so Tim told him, basically he said, I wish I could quote it word for word. He said, look, we've done all the tests and it hasn't helped me improve. Sometimes I find it's not about it's not about me lowering the mission to meet my limited strengths. It's me raising myself up to meet the mission. And to me, that really stuck with me because, again, so much of leadership it's about you. It's about you and what you like and what you want to do. And it's not. It's about you becoming what you need to be to make the mission happen. And the whole concept of, and I understand when people are saying just be yourself, authentic self, but there's a lot of misconception in that. Because first of all, who is you? Like, if you have a growth mindset and you look at neuroplasticity, we are constantly growing and getting better. And sometimes by putting that label, well, this is just who I am, we're limiting ourselves of what we can become. Vin Zhang, he's a great communications expert teacher. Like his on Instagram and stuff, it's Ask Vin, VINH. He's amazing. I really recommend him. But he goes through a concept called 88 keys. And he's talking about your voice in this, because like a piano has 88 keys. We as people often use like the middle 12 keys, or maybe a little bit left to the right. And that's our voice. That's what we use. That's what we say is us. But he said, no, your whole range is the 88 keys of your voice. But you're just used to only using 12. And he says, and sometimes people say, well, that's my natural voice. He says, no, it's not your natural. It's your habitual. It's just what you have practiced. He says, it's not being authentic, being that 12 keys. Being authentic is using your whole self of what you can be. He said, don't limit yourself. Don't limit your future self by just trying to be those 12 keys. And I think sometimes we limit ourselves like, well, that's just not who I am. Well, how do you know who you are? We're so multifaceted. What can you become? Is it good for you? Is it better? Is it good for the team to grow and be better? And so I think that's part of it is sometimes we limit ourselves. I'm sorry, I kind of went off on a tangent. It's about, people always say it's about ourselves, but also Patrick Lencioni in his book, The Motive, he talks about the motive of leaders. And this is like a huge, like this whole about you thing, because he says you can either have a selfish motive or you can have a service motive. And with the selfish motive, many people get into these leadership positions because of the rewards they get, the perks, the parking spots, or like he was talking about CEO. Well, I've earned this, I've earned this position, so it's my reward. And when you have that selfish motive, whether it's for your career or see it as a reward or for the perks or the power or money, then you're not going to do the hard work that leadership requires. Because leadership is hard work if you do it right, because you're serving, you're leading people, and you have to have those hard conversations. You have to do the things you have to do. But if you're just selfish motive, you're just going to do what helps advance you, or just what's comfortable to you. And then the mission doesn't happen like it should. And when I say mission, I mean goals, direction, whatever. I've come into the habit of saying the word mission. But when you have service mentality, your mentality is, I'm serving the team to accomplish the mission. And the mission comes first. And when you look at good to great, and Jim Collins in his research on good to great, he said the two big things that leaders had that for the great companies level 5 is that they were humble and that they were driven. And driven as in they're all about making it happen. They're about the mission, making it happen. But humble because it wasn't about them. It wasn't about their ego. It wasn't about them looking good. In fact, when people gave them credit, they passed it on. And they were even okay with people not knowing it was them that brought that company to that level and the future generations, because the mission and the organization came first. And so I think the mentality, so in the broad sense, I think the biggest myth is that it's about you and not about serving. So
it's a good myth. I like it. And it's not an answer. I get that frequently, actually, when we get into that similar field. But yeah, it makes me think about that kind of the point of transition when you're going from that solo practitioner or contributor into leading for the first time. And and it's a very simple example, but it has meaning, I think, because of the way it's perceived. And it's just that difficulty with the change of language, isn't it? So whereas before it would have been all about I, now it needs to be we. And a lot of people really get that wrong. They struggle with it and they trip over themselves, or they just carry on saying I and don't realize the impact or perception that's creating among the people they're now leading. Yeah, it's sometimes it is the small things though, and that will stack up over time. I like leadership as service as well. I mean, the servant leadership, the whole thing, and Robert Greenleaf and his writings and all of that. And it all, again, it's influenced by another name, isn't it? And it's about why you're doing it as much as what you're doing.
Right. Absolutely.
Yeah,
your motive matters.
definitely. Yeah. And if you think people can't determine your motive just because you don't tell them, then yeah, you're dreaming.
Oh, yeah.
People pick up, people know.
People know. Yeah. And if you're serving yourself, people like you said, they recognize that, and your ability to lead is even hurt by that, because if they know you put yourself over them and the team and the mission, you're going to hurt your influence with them because of that, because they know what your priority is.
Yeah, 100%. And yeah, to paraphrase one of my research participants from a few years back, it was nobody wants to work for a boss who they feel is just there so they can retire on a private island by themselves. And that's what it's really all about, isn't it? It's you want to feel that kind of sense of belonging, of community, even with your leaders, because yeah, if they're just in it for themselves, then selfishly, like, what's in it for you as well? Like, why should you give them your best effort if they're not doing the same in return?
Yeah, and I can see that even become a very transactional relationship, which is not what you want by any means.
No. What I don't think it is. Not if you want a team that will survive in the long term. I mean, maybe in some industries where like turnover is high and it always will be, and there's nothing you can do about that. Maybe then, but yeah, I'm not sure there's many industries like that left now.
Right. Yeah.
Okay, so the next question, and I have my own thoughts on this, but I'd love to hear your perspective on it.
Okay.
Why is it you think that we have so many bad bosses or leaders or managers? Because, I mean, everyone I've ever spoken to has a story about one. So why do you think?
I think there's a wide spectrum of reasons. And let me start off with a story. So, David, I want you to imagine that you're in the middle of a field, long wavy grass, clouds over nice sun warming your face. And I want you to imagine that you've lived your whole life in that field. And the whole time you've eaten grass. Like, that's all you've had. The skinny grass you've enjoyed, it's kind of stringy. The thick grass is juicy. And you love the grass with the flowers on it. That's like your favorite. So let's say one day I walk into the field and I see you, and I walk up to you and ask you a totally normal question when you see a person in the field. I walk up and ask, I'm like, hey, David, do you know what good food tastes like? Normal conversation. And what would you say? Would you say yes or no?
I'd probably point at the grass with the flowers on it, if I was honest.
Yes, exactly. Exactly. Because that's all you've ever had. You don't know there's anything better. And you never had Thai food. You never had a steak, or whatever, unless you're vegetarian, steak wouldn't work. But you've never had different food. And that's the same, I think, with leadership. As many leaders, they've eaten grass their whole life, and they don't realize there's anything better. So, for example, part of that is, if you've had in your whole life bad bosses and mediocre bosses, you're going to think mediocre bosses are great because that's the best you've ever seen. And so I think that's an element of it. Is Gene McNaughton, he has a book called The Sales Edge, and it's a great sales book. But in one of the first chapters, he says 90-something% of salespeople just pick up. They get what they got from picking up along the way. That's how they learn how to sell. And that just clicked with me, because it was like, that's exactly what leadership is. Many times we just pick up what we see, and that can be a good thing or a bad thing. And so we've seen that what we see can be good or bad. Then you have the conventional wisdom out there, especially on LinkedIn and articles and stuff. And just like in most conventional wisdom, I find is often wrong. Often the conventional leadership is wrong. And what people are telling you, like there's so much emphasis, for example, on discovering your leadership style. But if you actually read like the best books on leadership, they don't mention styles, they mention principles, because that's what's important. But so much, and again, like we already talked about, it's a focus on you. So much is about you and all this stuff. And if you listen to that and you think, oh, well, that's normal, that's leadership, then that's going to hurt you. But that's what you're learning. That's the grass you're eating. And so I think I love that. But part of it too is our human nature, that there's the Dunning-Kruger effect, that the less you know about something, the more you think you know. And I think that happens a lot with leadership. And then we as humans, like to think well of ourselves. Like if you ask a room of 100 people, who's an above average driver? Well, most people are going to raise their hand because everybody thinks well of themselves. And so like no one thinks, or very few, there's always exceptions, but basically no one thinks they're a bad leader. Like even the worst boss you ever had, they think they're a good boss, even though they're not. And so we have this propensity as humans to rationalize what we do and to overthink of ourselves. And I think also we think, and this is all on a personal level, we also think that being a bad leader makes us a bad person. Like, for example, like if I'm bad at leadership, which is a skill, but if I'm bad at it, then I'm a bad person. So I can't be a bad leader. I don't want to accept that. And that's not true. It's just like learning guitar. If you haven't practiced it, you're going to be a bad guitar player. But we often equate the level of leadership in ourselves with us as a person, and that's dangerous. So in the personal level, I think that's why we have poor leadership, but also in organizations, people don't realize how important leadership is. And because they don't understand it, but also the importance. So they don't train people like they should. And then they promote for the wrong reasons. And you promote because someone's a high performer, not because, or they have an educational degree, not because they know how to lead people. And I think all of that together combines into a big mess of we've got bad bosses.
So much for what you say there, I, of course, massively agree with. And I've, seen it happen, same as you have, I'm sure. But the whole dynamic of a leadership position as a reward for doing good work, that I think is where the problem starts, isn't it? Because you're rewarding the wrong thing with the wrong reward. Mm-hmm. So of course you're going to end up with leaders who have the wrong priorities, the wrong principles, because they've always been about themselves first, about the paycheck. Usually that's the driving motivation, isn't it? Nothing wrong with being in it for the money. That's why anyone has a job. But at the same time, that shouldn't be your motivation to be in a leadership position for all the reasons we've talked about already. With
that, like you're saying, for the paycheck, part of the thing too is that companies, they make it where you have to go into management to advance your career. Mm. Like there's no other pathway. So you end up with people who are doing it because they want, again, the paycheck, not because they want to lead.
No, I was going to say that next, actually. You read my mind. But that is the problem, isn't it? And particularly in the economic times and climate that we've seen in the last decade or two, decade and a half, I suppose. The money matters. Like you need to pay the bills or you might lose your home or not be able to feed your kids or yourself even. And so and particularly with some of the inflation issues we've seen in large parts of the economies and countries in the West, at least, you've got to keep chasing that next bigger paycheck in order to just tread water and break even some of the time. So it's mixing those priorities, isn't it? And I've talked about it before, and I don't know a practical way of making it work, but I would love to see like a separate track of progression and pay rises for people who aren't interested or know they won't be any good at leadership, but who are really good at a technical part of their role, or they're a really great salesperson, for example, which I find usually, not always, I don't want to be unfair, but I find is usually mutually exclusive to being a good leader, but that might be my bias at work. Or in the scientific fields as well, like most scientists have zero interest in anything other than the science. But if they get to a position where they need a bigger paycheck, management is the only option they're given. And I do feel like that's wrong. And there should be but again, I have no idea how we would make that work in a real business.
It's kind of funny that we reward people for doing a good job, and like, you're a great graphic designer, you're amazing, so let me move you to a job that has nothing to do with your old job.
So I'm not going to let you do that anymore. It's mad, isn't it? I mean, the project manager in me just despairs at the terrible resource management there as well. Like you've got your highest skill in that area, so you're taking them out of it. Mad, isn't it? It is. When you think about it like that, it just makes no sense whatsoever. And yet it's the norm. That's what every company I've ever worked for does. It's the accidental manager, isn't it? I guess is the people who just sort of stumbled into it for other reasons. But I think when you take that problem and then the issue of not having really an example that the grass in the field, if that's all you know, and again the bit about being a bad person because you're a bad leader, I probably agree. I think there is some crossover. Some bad managers are also bad people.
Yeah, some are, but if you look at it like a skill that you have to learn,
No,
but just
I'm
because I
joking.
just say it in a sense, just because you're not, I say that more because if you find out, oh, maybe I'm not as good as I think I am, that's okay. It doesn't mean you're a bad person. It just means you need to learn more. But yes, there are many bad bosses too who are bad leaders and bad.
I think that point is quite a good filter to figure out if they're also a bad person or if they're a good person. It's what they do next once they realise that, isn't it? Because the good person will go and do something about that and learn something and address their skills, whereas the bad person will probably just be like, oh well,
yeah,
don't care, still getting paid,
That's true.
Yeah, so I mean, when you combine all of that and then also the training problem on top of it, I mean, it's exactly as you say. There's many reasons.
Yeah.
But the really infuriating part of it, the frustrating part of it is almost all of those problems are quite easily solved.
Yeah, I agree, man. If we just trained, if we took the time to really understand leadership and then trained it well and made it, because it's number one, it's so important.
Yeah.
Yet training is often so lacking. Or I've seen, like in the educational field, for example, it's so deceptive because you can get an educational leadership degree, but it doesn't mean they actually taught you how to lead. Often what they teach is duties. Like this is what, like I get it in education. There's so many laws and legal stuff and SPED special education you have to get right because you can get sued and all this stuff. So there's so many aspects of it, but you still have to teach people how to lead. And so sometimes, and then if they do teach a little bit, they may take a little section like, well, let's discover what kind of leader you are. Well, how about talk about principles of this is what it takes to be a good leader. And this is how you lead people. And so I think, so even when they do have training or so-called leadership training, it's so lacking. And again, like you're saying, if we get leadership training, like if the future, it doesn't take much to change it. And then if people aren't willing to learn, and they want to, then move them out of position. Because sometimes we reward people. Well, you're a bad leader, so let me put you into a different, like if you're a bad principal, let me put you into a different school, or let me move you into a different position. I had a relative in the military back a few decades ago, and he said the mentality was mess up to move up. Well, if you're messing up in this position, let's just move you somewhere else versus, how about we deal with the leadership problem? Which is okay. If you don't know how to do it, let me teach you. If you're learnable, great. If you're not, I think you got to go. Like you said, it wouldn't take much. I mean, simple solutions. Maybe some of it may be a little more challenging, but yeah.
Yeah. No, I mean the old sideways move. I've seen that happen a few times as well. Like when you get to a position where there's so many. Pretty much all of your direct reports are complaining about this person and their leadership approach and how they're taking credit for their work and, working half the hours of anyone else in the team, all this kind of nonsense. And the response from management is, okay, well, we'll just take that leader and just plot them in this department instead. There we go, problem solved. And they go home and sleep well all night, I'm sure. But all they've really done is just given another group of people that same problem. So you've ended up with two teams in jeopardy instead of fixing the one that had the problem.
Yeah. It's crazy.
Yeah. It's interesting you mentioned the military as well, because what I understand and the way it works in the States and in the UK, actually, they seem to be one of the few places or institutions, organisations that get it right-ish. And the reason I say that is two things, really. One is they train you to be a leader before they make you a leader. I mean, do you know any company that does that? I've never met one. Certainly not in the private sector. But does that not feel like a basic thing? Like if you want someone to do the job, teach them how to do it.
Important.
Yeah,
that seems
check
like
they
smart.
know how to do it before you ask them to do it, at least.
Yeah.
And then what I was talking about earlier, where you have that kind of separate progression track that doesn't involve leadership. So there are like technical specialist roles where you just progress. Your promotion is about your technical prowess, whatever the job is, instead of making you lead people if you don't want to.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. I never thought about it that way, but that's true. Yeah. The way they have it set up is, I guess, a good start on building good leaders in the organization.
Yeah. I mean, I guess the stakes can be a lot higher. So it kind of makes sense why they would
think
differently about it, wouldn't it? But yeah. And it obviously works, or they would have stopped doing it by now.
Yeah.
So there's a lesson there, I think, for business leaders. But,
yeah. Good point.
If you had to pick what the biggest leadership lesson was that you learned in your career so far, what do you think it would be?
I think a lot of it's kind of stuff I've talked about already. But I think the biggest one really is that's not a position, because that's what I really believed for so long. I had to have a position. And if I have a position, then I can lead. And again, that's not true. And really, I think really that is the biggest one for me. And some of the things I learned, but it wasn't like I was hard hitting for that, because if I just had known back then, it's just influence. And if I had just spent the time to build relationships and help other people win, that's one of the biggest ways to build influence. Is caring about people, building those relationships, being competent, being the reliable and the go-to person, and you help other people win in what they're trying to do. And if you can align what you're trying to do with what they're trying to do, even better. But if you help other people win, they're going to more than likely come help you. And if you do that and you build that influence, I could have led in so many other ways without having any position. Didn't matter. But I was just like, well, I'll just have to have a position. Or people need to know I'm the boss so I can tell them what to do. No, that shows a big lack of influence if I have to think that. So.
Yeah, well, that's it. Like, if you have to rely on the title to get people to do what you need doing, then you're not leading them, are you? We're back to that leadership versus management again, I think. I agree with you. And it does come down, again, like I'm going back to how we define leadership. Like, what does it mean? And I think sometimes, no, you don't need a title. Yes, anyone can do it in any context almost. And sometimes it's just about like the small stuff that you do day to day that just has a little bit of impact on someone else's life that makes their day a little bit better. That's leadership, ultimately. To me, yeah, see, I've said it.
Yeah.
So the opposite question then, what do you think is the biggest or maybe the most common mistake that managers make?
I think one of the biggest mistakes, disregarding everything we've already talked about, is not listening, honestly. I've noticed throughout my career, or especially in certain organizations. I remember one big organization I was part of, and I went through the onboarding, and it was painful. Like, more like I didn't have my equipment when I needed to. I was supposed to start getting results be ready to get results at one point, but I wasn't supposed to get my computer equipment to close to that time. And it was just like all this craziness. And that stuff sometimes happens, mistakes happens and all that. And I get that, but there's no way for me to give feedback. There's no way for me to share. And nobody ever asked, like, how was the onboarding? How was this? How was that? And so throughout my, that first year there was so much simple changes that could have been made, but nobody ever asked. And just going to my boss wouldn't have mattered, because it's not them. It was bigger, and it's for them, and the chances of them actually passing something on was very nil. So I went through that whole first year, and at the end of that year, they had a survey that was like an employee survey, and you let your voice be heard type thing. And what it was like a survey of 1 through 5, like, how stressed are you? Or 1 through 5. What do you plan to stay? 1 through, it was like, and there was no actual open box of like, hey, how can we improve? Nothing. I was just like, holy cow. And so it's messed up in a number of ways. First of all, you don't get that feedback, but you have people who think just by reading 75% had the number 4, that means this, so we need to make these changes, when they really don't know. And so I emailed the people, like the president type person. I'm being very vague on purpose, and I emailed them. It's like, hey, it would have been great, if we had an open box, so I could just, we could give our really input. But I never heard back from it. I'm like, wow, like that really told me you really don't care about my voice. And
yeah.
and even though the exit survey, when we did the exit, when I left that company, like, you're supposed to, the paper that you turned in, you had to have your manager sign the paper you're leaving. And on that paper, you're supposed to put why you're leaving. And I'm thinking, if my manager is the problem, which she wasn't, but if she was, I wouldn't put that on that piece of paper, because they're going to see it and sign it. And their exit survey was like, It was more like regulation type stuff. How safe did you feel? And nothing like, hey, why did you leave? How can we improve? What can we do better? Often I find that when leaders get into management positions, like there's a couple things. One, we sometimes people think because someone's in a leadership position that they know how to lead. Like we just assume, well, it's a CEO, they must be a good leader. That doesn't mean anything. Like we kind of talked about. They may be, but they may not be. You don't know. And until you see the evidence. But sometimes when people get into those positions, it's easy to assume that you know how to lead, kind of like we talked about. But it's also easy to assume that you know better. And especially if you have some kind of educational degree or something, you have some specific knowledge. So sometimes leaders, when they get into these positions, when you get into managers, like, well, I got raised up for a reason, so I know better than the people who didn't get raised up. And so often you get these policies and procedures and stuff passed down that are meant to help, but they don't, they hurt. And especially the higher you get up, the more detached you are from the issues. And so the less you listen, like those people in the organization, they didn't listen at all, but they kept passing down policies that made things hard for us. And I even like another lady I knew, she worked in the medical field, and it was like she was so frustrated because of those policies that kept getting passed down that hurt instead of help. And so my suggestion, I know that's a long-winded thing, is always be listening. Like you don't know as much as you think you do. So listen, the people on the front lines probably know more than you do, especially the higher up you go. They see the problems, they see the issues. So first, you should be, as much as possible, that decision-making power should be in their hands to handle problems related to their jobs. But even more, you should always be listening. We mentioned the Toyota factory earlier. One of the policies they had is like they asked for suggestions from people, and they constantly did what the suggestions, like people, hey, if we move this machinery here, it'll work better. So they would do it. GM before that wouldn't do that at all. Like it was just like, just do what you're told, period. But they had a policy where every single suggestion or complaint they would implement, or they would give you a written response why they couldn't do it. And of course, even Toyota has that cord that you can pull if there's an error, and it stops the whole line, costs them thousands of dollars. And they encourage you to do it because they trust you. And anyway, listening, trust, all of that is, if you do that, then it helps you make so many better decisions because of that.
Yeah, I mean, the surveys are a great example. I think you can learn so much about your employer by the questions that they don't ask because they don't want the answer. As soon as you said like there was no box to give my thoughts, like, yeah, because they don't want to know, because if they hear it, they might have to do something about it. So
that's true. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a funny one. I mean, at least you had an exit survey though. I've never had one of those.
Really?
Yeah.
I forget who wrote it, but they suggested, like not only should you have exit surveys, they were like throughout the year, you should have like before you leave surveys. Hey, is anything wanting to cause you to leave? That way you can solve it before they leave, But yeah,
it's
that's
not
crazy.
A terrible idea. Yeah. Well, again, it's because they didn't want the answers. Like, well, they thought they already knew. Yeah.
That's true. Yeah.
Back onto the slightly more optimistic side then. So all the leaders you've ever worked for, you don't have to name names unless you want to. I won't stop you. But what's been your best experience of being led?
I think I worked at a technical college, and it was kind of an interesting setup because there was a guy I kind of worked with before, and I was in the institutional effectiveness department, which did the accreditation, but also we looked at the ways we can improve the school. That's kind of a lot of what we tried to do. And so we were like in this big room, like there's this giant room that a couple of us were in. There's some offices on it that my boss and then the vice president was in. And even though he was the vice president, like we constantly all worked together and talked with each other, and we all met together. And it was very much of they trusted you. I remember the first time, honestly, I wasn't sure how it was supposed to be. Like I'd walk by, I was like, I'm going to the restroom. Because, sometimes people can be very, compliant, but they didn't care. I mean, obviously you got to go, but I wasn't sure because sometimes people are like, but they trusted you. Like they would see how things are going, they'd check up on you, and they'd see how they can help support you. but they trusted you in what you're doing. And a lot of the different endeavors, like we did accreditation, and we had accreditation come up right when I was there, when I first started. So there's a lot of stuff I had to do for that. But there's also other different projects like, hey, this would be a good idea. And it was like, well, go for it, try it. And then some stuff would work out. I budgeted or planned different things for the school, for students. Hey, this could be a good idea. Hey, this could be a good idea. Budgets cut that out, but I was still encouraged to pursue the ideas, to see what we can do, what could work, what could not, experiment. And it was all support. They all supported it versus, it wasn't a compliance mentality at all. Not one of fear, but one of help. And we're just a big team. Like our bond with each other was huge, and we just always worked together. It was just a great experience working with those people. Even with because we have the VP, sometimes VPs are like heavy. Sometimes there's just, he was the guy I worked with before, but we just go in there and talk to him and share ideas. And same thing with my boss, my boss, whatever. So yeah, that was probably my best experience I can think of.
Oh, nice. Well, thanks for sharing. But yeah, there's a few words that come out of that really underline the point, aren't there? Like trust and collaboration and that kind of open sort of environment. Interestingly, in my experience of compliance, like you're right, it is quite often a fear-based environment, isn't it? And the irony is very similar to leadership, actually, I think. Fear doesn't tend to lead to good compliance record, I think. Because they're doing it for the wrong reasons, aren't they? They're doing it because they're afraid of getting stamped on, as opposed to because they think it's the right thing to do. Right. And again, there's a leadership lesson there too. Yeah.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, only one question left for you. So this one's actually my favorite question. So everyone gets this one. It's called Leadership Heroes.
Leadership Heroes.
So if you had to pick one person, and I now have to specify one because people were doing 2 or 3, and it was all getting a bit messy. So if you had to pick one person, and it could be anyone you like, alive or dead, past or present, real or fictitious, if you like, who in your opinion would perfectly embody leadership, who would that person be and why?
I could go with my faith in the back to go really the cheap, easy route and just say Jesus, but I won't do that.
We do get that answer quite a lot, so you wouldn't be the first.
And I don't know if I'd say perfectly, because everything's a process and growth. I think an interesting, but speaking in the same biblical context, when I think if you look at Moses and the story of Moses leading Israel out of Egypt and all of that, and he made mistakes and stuff along the way, but it was interesting because it called him the most humble person, and his goal wasn't for his own glory. There's even a case where some other people, I forget exactly what happened. They were either prophesying or something was going on. I forget exactly what it was. And one of the other people were like, hey, we should stop them. And Moses was like, if God's going to use them too, why does that bother me? That's good. And so it wasn't about him. And he was about, in a sense, the mission of getting people, the Israelites, to, the promised land. And even has a story he listened because he was handling hundreds of thousands of people, and he was handling a lot of the cases. People called him with the problems, and his father-in-law came down and saw what was happening. And his father-in-law was like, dude, what you're doing is, he didn't say dude, I don't think, but he's like, dude, what you're doing is, it's not smart. And so he taught him basically, maybe he did. He taught him delegation, basically. And so we have a big example of, he got other people to handle these issues, so that these people handled these issues and this would happen. And then if it couldn't get resolved at that point, then it would come to him. So he wasn't focused on all the details like that. And so it's just different things about him that, he was humble. He was he was about doing what needs to do, taking care of the people, serving. He's a good listener. And so even though he wasn't perfect, he was willing to grow and change, and he learned how to delegate. He learned this, and I think that's a pretty good example of, you don't have to go in a leader. You don't have to go in perfect. You have to get whatever degree or whatever in leadership. You just have to have that humble learning spirit to be willing to learn and grow. And we're talking about bad leadership doesn't equal bad person unless, you're just not willing to change. If you come in with that humble attitude, you may be bad at leadership now. If you're put in that position as a manager and you don't know, that's okay as long as you recognize it, because then you're going to do something about it. Like, it's okay if you start out, all of us start out at level 0, and because we either grow and learn while we're teenagers and kids, some aspects, or we don't. You may start at level 0 when you're 30, and that's okay. Just learn and just keep going. If you have that humble attitude and just willing to learn, then go for it, keep moving forward.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of humility in leadership. I think partly because, again, we've all encountered those really arrogant leaders who make it all about themselves, and humility feels like the antidote to that.
Yeah. Sure.
And Moses, interesting pick. And I think you might be the first person to pick that as well. So, hooray, bonus points. Yourself on the back, etc. Yeah, no, interesting one, though. And yeah, I think there's a lot to be learned there. And that kind of the quiet leader approach, who just sort of sits back and through that other form of influence, really, but still gets the job done, but without having to make it all about themselves. Yeah, which is a nice way of rounding off everything we've talked about today, I think.
Yeah, I think so.
Well, Thomas, thank you so much for your time. It's been lovely meeting you. Really enjoyed our conversation. One more little thing I'll ask you is, if anyone would like to learn more about you, perhaps get a copy of that book, where can they go to do so?
You can just go to theexceptionalskills.com. The articles, you can contact me there. Also have a link for my book there. So yeah, just go to the site and you can reach me.
Awesome. And listener, you will find that in the episode description. So just click on the link and go and learn more things. Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Thomas. Have a great rest of your day. And,
you too.
Yeah, hope we'll talk again soon.
All right. Sounds good.
Great chat there today, Thomas. Thank you again for your time. And listeners and viewers, if you want to find out more about his work, then hit those links in the show notes below, visit his website, and learn more about what Thomas does. Thank you for listening, or for watching, or both today. I appreciate you so much for your support, for your time. The podcast would not be here without you, and I hope it's proving useful and helpful and occasionally entertaining as well. Do join me again next week when we'll be talking workplace drama, high-performing teams, and the common challenges of leadership and management with my next guest, Brenda Neckvertal. Until then, if you want to come along to my Integrity Leaders online community, share your own experiences of leadership, feedback on the podcast, or just to say hi, please do come and visit us. It's www.leadernotaboss.com, and then hit that green button and it will take you from there. You'll get a little intro video and a form to fill in. It's a very small form. It's a registration form, basically. So yeah, hope to see you there soon. And I will be back again next week. Be a leader, not a boss.